Alright my friends, how you all doing? Welcome back to the channel and welcome to some more Planet Zoo content. I'm going to give you another episode of How To today. Obviously I did an episode a little while ago, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks ago now. I'll link it above for you right now my friends in case you missed that one. And we discussed like floor designs and how to make them look a bit more interesting, how to sort of disguise certain things and stuff like that. And it was really popular, and in that video I asked you to start getting your ideas to me on stuff you would like to see me cover, potentially give you some hints, some tips, some tutorials and that sort of stuff on things that potentially you're struggling with. I do have another couple of these sort of in the pipeline as well. I'm going to be doing them with a member of the Planet Zoo community, and hopefully they will be on the channel in the next few weeks as well. But today what we're going to discuss is one that was left to me by Fanral, who is a avid viewer on the channel, a big part of the community as well, and she asked me on Discord for some tips and tricks and some advice on disguising ugliness. Now, this is obviously it depends what you consider ugly. Some people will happily, put stuff down, leave very sort of, jagged edges and whatnot, and they don't really mind about it. But some of us, maybe some that have got more of an eye for detail, some that are trying to create realism, we don't like that ugliness, and there are ways around it. There are some very sort of simple tips that I can give you that might help you create ideas to deal with this. Now, there are a number of things that can be considered ugly as well. There isn't just going to be one little thing. I think in particular Fanral was talking about edges in buildings. How do you disguise that? Potentially things that come through walls and things like that. I will discuss that and we'll talk about that. But I've also put a couple of other examples of what I consider to be things that can be relatively ugly as well. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through the befores, and then I'll give you the afters and tell you where I kind of get my ideas and potentially how you could utilize this into your projects. I think that's probably the easiest way to do this, rather than how I did it with the last episode where I was talking about floor designs and whatnot. So here are my 4 examples of what I consider to be potentially ugly things in a zoo when you're creating one in Planet Zoo. First and foremost is this. Obviously, we all know that some of the pieces you have to build on a grid system, and so it's very limited. You build at 90-degree angles, and so sometimes you have to split the buildings to be able to get nicer angles, to be able to make more interesting buildings. But every now and then, because it is grid pieces, you'll end up with this. And I'm assuming this is the sort of thing that Fanral was on about when she was asking me questions. You'll end up with this, where you'll get this horrible edge. Now, because these two pieces are split, this is actually a very simple fix, but there are a number of ways you can do it. You don't just have to do it one way, and we will come to that in a moment. But I consider that very ugly, because this is a lip that could sit, you've got to use your imagination. Obviously I'm only using 2 pieces, but this is a lip that could sit on the inside of a building, and nobody really wants to be seeing that, do they, when they've created this lovely interior on a building, but then you see this horrible piece in a wall. So I will come to that in a moment and give you a couple of examples on how you could get around that. This is another one, and this is one that I conquer and I come across a lot myself. I'm not very good at the terrain tool. I'm very open about that. I'm trying to get better, but I am not fantastic at the terrain tool. So how I try to add, elevation in a zoo and stuff like that is to just use raised footpaths and then disguise them. If you're looking at a raised footpath like this though, it's not nice to look at. It really isn't. At the end of the day, you've got these horrible edges. Obviously I take all of the railings and stuff on because I like to customize everything, but even if you were to put the railings on and supports and stuff, it's still not very nice looking. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples on how you can potentially sort of you can hide the empty gaps and whatnot and bring it to life, because I do consider that an ugly thing in the zoo, and especially if you're trying to build raised buildings and you've got stuff like this inside as well, you want to make it a bit more interesting. Now this is one that I think a lot of people probably come across. Now I'm going to give you a couple of examples of this as well, but very popular sort of technique in zoos is to build the path high and the habitat low. It's a technique that most zoos all around the world will use. It's a good way to stop animals escaping, but build more natural habitats and to give more natural viewing areas to the guests. But the trouble that you have in Planet Zoo when you build something like this is you are left with these very ugly sort of pieces of ground and whatnot, where the elevation's different, but you end up with it at a slight angle, a slight slant and whatnot, and it is a very difficult thing to try to disguise. Now, you can do it a natural way, you could do it more, you could do more architectural ways. I'll give you a couple of examples, my friends, on how I go about this, but this is something that can be quite difficult for some people to disguise. And when you leave it threadbare like this, it isn't that exciting to look at either. Not only is it ugly, it can tend to be a little bit boring as well. And I've also included in here water, because when you create water in this game, again, you are left with these relatively ugly edges. At the back, as you can see, it is a lot higher up, and it's just not a very nice thing to look at. So I'll give you some potential ideas on that. And then we come to the last one, and this sort of feeds into what I was talking about in the last episode of How To, when I was talking about floor design. The path tool in this game isn't the easiest to work with, and sometimes you are left with these horrible little gaps in your path. But there are ways around it so that you can get rid of them and you can make this look a bit more interesting, and we will go over this as well. Now, I just want to throw this out there. This is not me preaching to the choir and saying this is how you have to do it. These are just going to be some examples of what I do and some helpful tips that hopefully you can use in your projects. So, in the blink of an eye, we are now going to jump to my examples, and I'm going to show you my thought process and show you some ideas that you can utilize in your projects. Okay, my friends, so I am back. I've done some very, very quick examples of little tips and ideas that I use on a very regular basis. They might not be the most detailed compared to a lot of the stuff that I do on the channel, but at the end of the day, these are just very minute things that you can use that may just take your zoo to another level at the end of the day, which is kind of what we were talking about in the intro, weren't we, of today's little video. So first and foremost, let's talk about this one, because this is the one that was brought up first and foremost. This has been brought up quite a lot, actually, and it is those ugly edges on buildings, especially when you're using grid pieces. How do we get rid of them, and how do we disguise them? So there's two things I do a lot. Now, I build the majority of my buildings out of plaster, and then I detail them. And if I am going to use, say, like a brick piece or a piece that's gridded, that's got a bit of detail on it, like stone or something like that, for instance, then I'll make sure that I will use pieces that are going to work with them. Also, what you will find with a lot of my buildings, I detail the insides, and so as a result, when I get those overlaps like you can see here, I will either just separate pieces and push them back, or on the inside of the walls I will cover in plaster, so then it looks as though the inside is different to the outside, because let's be honest, in real life that's how it looks. I take my house, for instance. On the outside of my house, it's bricks and mortar, the front's rendered, but inside all the walls are plastered, every room is different, and so you should treat your buildings a bit like that in Planet Zoo. I take a lot of my inspiration for all of my building series are taken from images I look at online, things that actually exist in the real world. That way you will get as realistic a build as possible. If you're going for something that's not meant to be realistic, then you just use your imagination. But where this sort of stuff is concerned, there's two ways I get around it. First and foremost is I would just separate the pieces. So obviously these would be on separate grids already. They've been separate groups because that's the only way you can get shapes like this using grid pieces. But I would simply go on this one, I would enter, and then on this piece I would separate it from its group. Now, I know not a lot of people are going to like doing that, because the way the game works is as fewer groups as possible will help the game run better. If you can keep everything under one group when you're building a building or a habitat or anything like that, it will actually help the game move along. When there's multiple groups in one area, that is when sometimes you can experience a bit of lag. So obviously if you don't have the greatest of computers, it might not be the option for you. But I would simply do that, and then I would just move it back. I would get it to the point where we see that it matches up, it lines up, it's nice, it's done, it's there. You are going to get some clipping, so make sure you just move it to make sure you don't worry about that. And bang, there you go, you've got rid of that ugly edge, and it really is a simple way around it. But if you can't do that, because sometimes you can't, there might be a point where you've got your building in place, it doesn't really allow it, because at the end of the day, this could be here. I'm trying to give you a good example. So if we were to move this piece, so for instance, Oh, they're still in separate groups. Let's get them in the same group again. Let's move this piece, okay? So say it was like this. Say your edge of your building was like this. You wouldn't be able to do what I've just done. There's no way you would be able to get that to move that way. And if you then come across something like that, this is where if you build with plaster or you change the inside of your walls and cover them in plaster or a different design, it can help you. It can really play into your hands, because then what you can do is you can take the plaster pieces, you can create a completely different layer, and you can move these across and get those in line, and then hey presto, you've got rid of that ugliness. Now, a problem you may face though if you do this is when it comes to doing your roofs or when it comes to doing some designs on the top, you are going to be left with some very, very strange lines. For instance, this is what you're going to be left with if you were doing a flat roof, for instance, okay? So you're going to be left with this very, very deep wall design, and so you want to get it to a point where if you're going to be putting your ceilings on, you kind of want it all to match up. Now, a way to get around this, and so that you can treat this as your edge, and even though you're going to have this ugliness here, is when you put your ceiling on, so let's just use this piece here, we'll rotate. So say for instance your ceiling goes on and your ceiling is that height. These inner walls can be moved down. So move them down so then you don't have that at the top. You can use this as your true external wall. What do you do with this then, Dan, is the question you're all asking next. Well, it isn't that bad. That isn't that bad there, that gap there, that's not terrible, but I know you're going to get some. What I would suggest you do is in these places is where you add your roof details. For instance, a solar panel, a piece where you're lowering it or hiring it to put things like aircon units, air ducts, that sort of stuff. Maybe try to look at things in the true world and have a look at things that end up on roofs. And then you can go from there. If you're going to have a pitched roof, you can get around this. You can get around this if you're going to do pitched roofs, because you won't see this. You won't notice it at all. And, at the end of the day, there's going to be some fighting if you're going to make a pitched roof for a building this shape anyway, because you're going to have a corner piece here, you're going to have this piece coming in, but you can overlap them all and they can all hide under one another. And maybe that is a video for a future episode in showing you how to manipulate roof pieces and whatnot. So yeah, it is difficult if you are going to be making these buildings that are wonderful shapes, because nobody just wants to make square and rectangle buildings. Nobody wants to do that. I am thinking about doing a tutorial on dome buildings as well. I know there's some really good ones out there already, but it'd be nice to have that in the series. But people want to make more exciting buildings, and so doing it this way is the easiest way, but you do get left with these little things. But I hope that helped to some degree. If you want me to go into that in more detail, maybe I could do a building that I build really extreme. We can break it down and I can show you in more of a sort of expert analysis of it all, I guess you could say. This is just really for the beginners that are trying to take it on to the next level, or maybe your intermediate players that are just trying to find ideas and ways to add a bit of detail to their zoos. So this is the second one. We were talking about stairs, we were talking about elevated paths and the way to make them look prettier. Now, I'm going to be honest with you, gang, I could have done a lot better job than I've done here. This is just a very simple example for you, but it's a simple yet effective example. It shows you exactly what I was talking about when I was talking in the intro about hiding those holes, hiding the ugliness, and bringing an area to life. And you can do it as simply as using a bit of mulch, some plants, and the plaster pieces. Now I'm going to throw it out there now. The plaster pieces are my hero piece in the game. They literally will cover up ugliness on the ground. They will cover up ceilings. They will cover up ugliness on walls, as I've just shown you. But also they will help you make magnificent planters, or they'll help you make bases for statues, and I've kind of combined the two where this is concerned. Now, as I said in the intro, I usually do custom rails, but I decided just to use the in-game ones for this because, to be honest with you, they don't look too terrible and they actually match up ever so slightly. So simply, all I did, if we look at the back of it, you can see this is what we were dealing with. This is what this is the sort of thing we were trying to disguise, and all I simply did was I took the plaster pieces and we built a wall at the back. That's all I did at first. If I click on it, I'll show you exactly what it is. Now, you have to double up, because if you want to hide this ugly lip, you have to double your plaster pieces up to make it work. If you want that lip exposed, you can have it exposed. You don't have to cover it up. You just literally have to build on the edge right there, and that's kind of where your wall begins. But I like it to appear as though my railings are a part of the wall and they're part of the whole thing. So it is simply just plaster pieces. You line them all up at the back, and then all I did is I took those plaster pieces and just rotated and got them to a point where I really liked them, built up the walls. We built up an external wall as well, as you can see here, and then we just covered that up, put some mulch in, put some plants in, and away you go. Hey presto, it's another thing done. It's another way to disguise some ugliness, and it brings an area to life. My biggest piece of advice that I can give you is do not be afraid to use the rocks and to use the plants and to use the mulch, because they will bring areas to life. Many people who watch a lot of the series on this channel always say, you know, they always fall in love with the planting and the stuff that I do in my projects, and it's because I use those as a way to accent buildings. It's amazing how you can take a building, and as good as it will look, the minute you put 2 or 3 trees behind it and you give it some height and you give it some width and you give some colour and some backdrop and you give sight lines, it will bring something to life. And you can bring something like a staircase like this to life as well by doing something as simple as this. Now we're going to come to the last option. I deleted that path thing because I genuinely think, gang, if you go and watch that video I did last time, that will help with that. That will be probably the best thing you could do to disguise, you know, ugliness like that. The only other thing I could say, if you didn't want to use custom floors, is potentially build planters. A bit like that, only you build them around those little gaps. A little bit of mulch, throw some plants in. Away you go. You could even put lights, you could put all sorts of things in those little gaps, and it will bring it to life. Now, this here is an example of something I do a lot in my zoos. I build for realism, and when you have these sorts of things, you always have concrete drop-offs, or you will have structures that are built that fall in, so the animals can't get out, but the people don't get in as well because of the railings and so on and so on. So I always aim for sort of realism, but there are more there's more than these 2 ways that you could probably do this to disguise this sort of stuff. I do definitely think that, but these are a couple of examples that I do. So for instance, you put your path in, we've obviously taken this terrain back, and you're left with this sort of very ugly mess here, and you want to cover it up, you want to make it look a bit prettier. Now this is just a design I put together. This is actually a design I've been using recently. I used it on the big tunnel network that we did in JCP, and it really came out nice, and so I've done it again, and I basically used it here, and I actually really like it, and I may use this in a future project of mine. So all it simply is, if I show you what I do, the best way I find to do this is build it out of materials where you can select them all and eventually combine them all into one group. So if I was to do this, look, I can combine them and merge them all into one scenery group. That's the best way to do it. Try not to use grid pieces because you won't be able to manipulate it as well, but simply I build one part and then I just copy and paste as I go along for the length. So for this, I would have just copy and pasted it all the way along, would have selected it all and then made it a group, and then away you go. You've kind of covered it up, and all this is plaster. If I select it, it's plaster, and it's this breeze block piece. So if I was to delete this out, I use plaster just to get the angle that I wanted, to get the shape, get that angle that I wanted, and then I covered it in this breeze block design. I used a trim as well here, just to show that we've we've got a piece there, we've got a piece at the bottom, and then I've put this here just as a different color and a way to separate where your guest path finishes and this starts. I like to add this because this is good for when you're building, because you can see exactly where your path is going to finish. Now I am going to say this is just one way of doing this. I do believe you can get the path a lot closer to the edge if you don't do it the way I've done it, but this is the quickest way, and I think the quickest way is probably the way that the majority of people do it. So that's why I'm showing you an example of this. But you can, if you was to take all this out, you can get that path a little bit closer than I have, but these distances are something you would experience in real life if you were going to a habitat and looking in. You wouldn't be right on top of the animal, so it's always nice to do that. And this, like I say, is more of a realistic option. And yeah, we just put the fence in as well, and that is as simple as that is, really. You know, you just want to make sure you get the angle right. This path piece here, for instance, if I was to move this way, as you can see, look, you're going to start losing it here a little bit, you know, into the ground. So you just want to make sure you get it to a point where you get the angles right. You know, you know how to do this sort of stuff if you've played the game. You just get your angles right, and then once you've got your base layer, which for me was just 3 plaster pieces, then you can detail over the top of that. If you so wish, you could probably delete that plaster out. I like to leave it there because it gives you this detail underneath. You get all these lines where all the bricks and stuff are joined up, and it just gives you a bit more detail. That's one way I find is really helpful doing this, to disguise these. As you can imagine, you go all the way across, it will look really, really pretty, especially once all your habitat's done. You know, you start adding some plants and whatnot at the bottom, and you really bring it to life. And another way of doing it, which is a way that I've done it in the past as well when I want to try to create stuff that's a bit more natural, is simply hide it using rocks. Now you can use these rocks, you could use the faux rocks that we've got now, but yeah, you could simply just hide it with rocks. You could hide it even with plants, especially if you've got big plants like this. You could definitely hide it with plants as well. All you got to be careful is when you're layering your rocks, if you're doing this for an animal that can climb or can escape, you don't want them to have the ability to be able to jump on and out of the habitat. You want to create it in a way so that it stops the animals doing that. I like to create realistic like this, and it does tend to stop the animals. They can't walk straight up this, they can't walk up and out of it. You know, you don't have to do this angled. You could come out even further and go straight down, and then you know the animals are definitely not walking out and never getting out. But you just got to be careful. But the thing about if you're going to do it with the rocks, find some rocks that you like, find some rocks at different angles and whatnot, and layer. That's what you want to do with the rocks. If I come off this, you just want to layer the rocks. You can see, you know, I've got these. This was very quickly put together. You know, if I'd spent a bit more time, I would have done it a bit differently. I've put the fence here. You don't necessarily have to, but I feel like if you wanted to go with this more natural look, but you were still going with realism, fences and stuff would still be there and would still be put in place. So that's a couple of ways to cover up the ugliness of when you're doing paths that are a bit higher to your habitat. And I'm assuming it would probably work if you went the other way, but it'd be a bit strange if you did go the other way. And then we come last, but by no means least, to this, and it is me disguising up the ugliness of the back of a sort of water, like a pond, if you will. I've used a waterfall. Now, you haven't got to use a waterfall. There's many ways of doing this. You could have put a little hut there. You could have put just loads of rocks. You could have built the rocks up. You could have put plants. You could have done a number of things. But this is just one example of disguising what was a very ugly sort of a very ugly piece of ground. You will remember from that intro, it literally was just awful. If I was to select this and I delete this out, this is what it looked like. And it's amazing how just adding that waterfall piece and then building up the rocks around it can completely transform the area. I will press play actually so you can see how the waterfall looks and how it moves, and I've even put some pieces at the bottom so you're going to get some more water movement, and it almost looks as though it's moving around the rocks, and you can bring an area to life just simply doing this. And I do think this is a lovely way of doing it, my friends. All I've done is I've just built the faux rocks up all around the edges and then just accented it with plants, and again, look how the plants bring it to life, you know. And the plants, they don't just bring the area to life. If I was to click on this and I delete this out, it covers up a relatively ugly area as well. They work in the same principle to the plants. Again, it covers up an ugly area, it covers up the edges of the rocks, and if you wanted, you could continue those plants all the way around the edge, or you could add something else back there. You could even have your perimeter wall there. You could have a number of things. The possibilities with this game at the end of the day are endless, and these are just simply a few helpful tips to help you guys disguise ugliness in the game. I hope this has been helpful. I could have done so many examples of things, and I could give you so many tips on this, because it's something that it's subjective, isn't it? Because we all see ugliness in this game very differently. I don't like all of these things in particular that I've pointed out to you guys, but there might be some stuff that you have seen here that you would never have thought to be considered ugly. There might be some stuff I've not covered. So, you know, it is one of those things. It's a very, very vast subject that we could talk about where Planet Zoo is concerned, but I hope the examples that I've given you today are some help, at least, my friends. But anyway, I'm done and dusted. Like I said at the beginning, I will be back with some more of these, but it will be alongside a member of the Planet Zoo community. I'm really excited to do them, actually. It's going to be a lot of fun cracking on with the person in question. But my friends, if you're new to the channel and you found this helpful, please consider hitting that subscribe button and dropping me a like on the video. If you visit the description box below, you'll find not only my Twitter, but you'll find my Discord as well if you want to become a bigger part of the community. But my friends, I am done and dusted. I am going to be saluting you all, not that you can see it. Stay safe, stay humble, and I'll see you all next time.